Hey, and welcome back to another video. So you built your iOS app and now you want to see how easy it is to support different platforms in SwiftUI. Well, in this video, we're going to be looking into just that. And we're going to build on top of our previous videos from within this course and see how easy it is to reuse our code and add in new code for iPad and macOS by using the new navigation split view. Now, before we just dive, I know you're eager, but before we just dive straight into the code, we'll look into what's needed to support multi-platform in Xcode, as well as some layout considerations that you may want to take into account when working with a navigation split view. We're going to build an adaptive layout for iPad where the UI is completely different. We'll discuss the best patterns in terms of UX and UI by also touching on the toolbar as well as some other things. By the end of this video, you should know everything that you need to know to bring your iOS apps to iPad and also macOS. So in this video, we're going to be tackling iPhone, iPad and Mac. But when working with navigation split view, the layout, for the content can change between what platform you're actually currently supporting. Now in iOS development, these are something called size classes, and this essentially describes the size or orientation of a screen within a certain context. And if we just look at the human interface guidelines now on the screen for layout, if you scroll to the bottom, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of different side classes that, there's a lot to remember. There's a lot going on. But let's say you're working on a more narrow screen or, like an iPhone, watch TV, or even if your app is in slide over mode, navigation split view will actually change its layout and actually default to using a stack layout, which is similar to what you see on the screen here, which is essentially just, screens within a navigation stack. But on screens where there's more space, such as iPad, Mac, and TV, it's actually possible to get a two-column layout, as you can see on the screen here, where you can see the sidebar and the detail view, and it shows off some content. And think of the sidebar like a navigation bar that you get on a website where tapping on one of the links takes you to a page. It's kind of similar. Now there's also a 3-column layout, which is a sidebar, detail, and a content. Now the difference here is that you can show your categories in the sidebar, display a preview of the content that someone can drill into in the detail further on. So it's almost like having categories, titles for the items, and then more detail about that item. So we'll be tweaking and reusing the code so we can get the most out of the navigation split view. So let's see how we can do that now. So I've just got the starter project here that you can get from my GitHub. But if we go to our general tab, you can see here that on the target, we can define the destinations in terms of where we want our app to go. Now, on my, project, I have iPhone, iPad, and Mac designed for iPad. So this ports whatever we've done on iPad over to the Mac for us for free. Now, if you're using a brand new fresh project, you might not see this, but if you're using a starter project, you should see this set up. You normally have a sidebar when you're working with an iPad, and that's what we're going to tackle now. So we need to create a sidebar view to display on our iPad and allow us to choose categories within our app. So to do this, I'm going to create a new group in here called sidebar, and then within here we're going to create another group called model, and then we're going to create a new Swift file in here called menu category. So this file is going to hold the categories that we will display in our sidebar within the app. And in order to do this, we're going to use an enum. Now I want this to be an int so I can uniquely identify each enum case. And then we're just going to define here food. And then we're going to also say drinks. And then desserts. So because we're going to be putting this in some kind of list so we can display it, we actually want to make this enum case iterable so we can just get all of the enum cases in an array, and identifiable so we can just loop through this. So let's do that now. So we'll do case iterable and then identifiable. In order to identify the ID with the identifiable, we're just going to say here ID. And then to uniquely identify each one, we're just going to use the raw value because this is an integer type enum. Cool. So within my sidebar as well, I want to give each item a title and an icon. So let's create an extension on menu category, and then I'll break this down. So you can see that I've done an extension on menu category, and I've just added a computer property here for title. And this is the string we want to return for title. And also the system name, well, system image. And this is just literally SF symbols, which I do have a video on my channel if you want to check that out to learn more about SF symbols. So now let's start looking to build our view. So let's create a new folder in sidebar called view, and then we'll create a new SwiftUI view in here called sidebar view. And inside of here is literally just going to be a list that loops through all of the categories in our enum cases and displays it, in a list. So let's just type this out now. So you can see here, nothing too crazy, just a list where we're just going through all the categories, and then we're going to get access to that category. And then in order to display the category with the SF symbol and the text in one view, I'm going to use a label. And then in here, for the title, we'll pass in the category dot title, and then category dot system image, like so. Cool. So let's just briefly go to the documentation to actually look at what we get with a navigation split view. So now in our docs, you'll see that for the navigation split view, just scroll all the way down to the bottom to see how to create one. So you'll see these two initializers. Now there's an initializer here for sidebar and detail, and also sidebar content detail. Now the one we want is the first one where you create a 2-column navigation split view. So what we're going to do is see what this looks like on both an iPhone and an iPad. So in order to do this, we're just going to build, see what our sidebar looks like by using the previews for our sidebar view. So let's go back to our project and we'll type this out together. And then on our sidebar view, we're just going to type in the preview, navigation split view. And we want to use this option here with the sidebar and the detail, like so. And then let's copy in our sidebar view, like so. And then for the detail, I'm just going to put some text in here. I want to create a preview where I can actually see this on an iPhone. So let's just run this. And on the modifiers, when this builds, so in our previews, what we want to do is we want to select our navigation split view. And then if you just open up this tab here on the right hand panel, you'll see you have some options where you can actually customize your previews. So the device I want this to be is an iPhone 14 Pro. And you'll see it automatically adds that in for us, and it should change this now. And I also want to give this a name of iPhone sidebar preview, like so. So now we have a title and our device on iPhone 14. So you can see on an iPhone, this just looks like a normal navigation stack, but it's just a list view. So let's actually add in another, navigation split view here. So let's copy this. And this time we're going to choose from our devices. So we just select the navigation split view and then go here. On our device this time, we're going to choose an iPad. So you can choose any iPad on the drop down here. I'm going to choose this one. And then for the name of this, we're just going to say iPad sidebar preview, like so. So now in order to see our iPad, we need to choose this tab here. And we should see our iPad once this loads. I'm just going to dismiss this to create a bit more space. And let's just zoom out. And you can see now that on our iPad, we have a sidebar. So what we can do is we can tap on this and I can now see my options here as well. And if I actually rotate this into landscape mode, you'll see that our sidebar also has all the, it's open by default, and I can actually hit this to open and close it. So this is looking, pretty good. So, adding this in, it's not a lot of code, man. Like Apple, they got us like that. They're looking out for us. But one thing I do want to do is I actually want to add a title here. So on our list, we're going to say navigation title and then menu, like so. Cool. So this is all right what we have here, but what I also, in this tutorial, we're going to be using this a lot, and I don't want to have to keep repeating this all the time. So it would actually be better if we extracted this out and added it into like some kind of custom modifier. So if you want to learn about building custom modifiers, I do have a video on that as well. So let's go into our sidebar preview here, and then now on our side preview here, what we want to do is we want to create a new folder called extensions. And I want to create a new Swift file called SwiftUI Preview plus device. And then within here, we're now going to build up our modifier to help us easily just say preview for iPhone or preview for iPad. So let's just add this in now. So we're going to need to import SwiftUI, and then we'll define a struct. We're going to need to define the body. So this is where we're going to apply the styles onto the view where we use this modifier. So I want to allow someone to pass in a device that they want to preview it for. So I'm going to create an enum called device, and it's going to have two cases. So one for iPhone and another for iPad. And then we're going to have a constant here called device, and the type is going to be device, so you can specify what device you want when you're previewing this modifier. So now within here, we're going to just literally just switch on the device that someone passes into this modifier. So switch on device, and then case.ipad, we'll just put a break in here for now, and case.iphone, we'll put a break in there as well. Cool. So we can just copy our modifier code. So we're going to our sidebar view, scroll down. So for our iPad, we want to use this code here. So let's just go into our previews. And then on here, we're just going to say content and then user previews like so. And then I also want to add in another preview for the orientation, and then just say landscape left. So by default, when we call this function, it will always put it in iPad in landscape mode. And then let's do the same for, our iPhone. So we actually want this to be iPhone, not iPad, because we've already got our iPad here. And then we'll just copy this content, boom. All right, boom. It's looking good. Sweet. So now we can create a function which will be our own like custom modifier function. So we're going to create an extension on the view, and then a function called preview for device. And the type here is going to be device modifier.device. And this is going to return some view. And then now in here, we can just say dot modifier, or to make it a bit clearer, we'll say self dot modifier, because we're applying it onto itself. Device modifier preview, and then the device that we'll pass in will just be this device from this function here, like so. Cool. So now we can use this back in our sidebar view, and rather than just having to do this, we can now just say dot preview for iPhone and dot preview for iPad, like so. And when our preview refreshes, you'll see that it looks good on iPad, and it also looks good on iPhone. So now that we know that this looks all right on iPad and iPhone, and we now have our modifiers for making our life easier, we're going to now use this navigation split view in our menu view. So let's go into our menu view. And a lot of the code that we actually have here, we're going to reuse it, but we actually don't want a navigation stack anymore, because we just want to use a navigation split view. And when you're on an iPhone, it will default to a stack. So we want to actually comment out all of the code that we have in here. So let's just give ourselves a bit more space. And then we're just going to comment this out like so. And above this, we're now going to create that navigation split view that we had before, pass in the sidebar view. And then for our detail, for now, we'll just put a dummy text. We'll replace this with some real, like a real view later on in this video, but we'll just say detail goes here. So in our menu view, we also want to preview this in iPhone and iPad. Right now, it's just doing iPad, but we want both. So if we just scroll down, we want to say menu view and then dot preview for iPad. And then we'll do another one here where it's going to be preview for iPhone. So now we have nice modifiers to just quickly just preview stuff without having to repeat ourselves. And you can see here our iPad and our iPhone on our menu view. Cool. So we're going to need to do a tiny bit of refactoring here. And the reason why I say that is because we actually have a fetcher, and I actually don't want to allow someone, if I just go into the iPad version, let's just zoom out a bit. So on iPad, I actually don't want to allow someone to be able to just select those categories whilst the app is still like loading. I don't want someone to be able to interact with this whilst we're fetching data. Now, if you're someone who's working on an app that doesn't require you getting any data, then you don't really need to worry about this. But in this video, we do. So in order to fix that, we're going to have to change what gets presented in our sidebar whilst we're fetching data. But first of all, we need to actually call our code to even fetch the data in the first place. So on the end of our navigation split view, we're going to say .task and then await fetcher dot fetch products, like what we did on our navigation stack. So now when our view loads, it will actually fetch the products. But in our sidebar, we want to reuse the code that we had here, where depending on what's going on, if it's fetching, we want to show a progress view, or else when it's finished, show the sidebar. So let's do this now. You can see that when I'm not running it on the preview, you can see our sidebar is actually just showing a progress view. So if I just zoom in a bit more to make it clearer, you can just see that it's showing a progress view here. So we're not able to interact with any of the categories. But if I hit run, you'll see that it fetches it, and then once it's done, we now get our categories. Now, one thing that I did realize that was better than what I did before was in our sidebar view, we actually don't want to add in the navigation title specifically here. Instead, we want to do it in our sidebar here with a group. So this will ensure that no matter what the state is, whilst our app is fetching the data, we'll always have the title menu within the sidebar. So we're just reusing code here. It's nothing new. This is just stuff that we have from our previous video. So we've got this working now, but right now with our sidebar, there's nothing, you can't really interact. If I just zoom out a bit, you can't really interact with our, categories in here. Like nothing happens when you tap on it. So we actually want to find out what someone selected, and we need to bind that to some kind of value. Now, in order to do that, we need to update our list to bind to a selection. And you know what I'm going to say, man, I've already got a video on it. So let's go into our sidebar view. So just to make this simple, I'm actually going to write the code within this, sidebar view so we can just get it working, and then we'll look at refactoring and extracting it out. So the first thing we need to do is actually create a state property to listen to what category someone has selected. So this is just a state property that's going to hold the category that someone selected, and we're going to bind this to the list. So on the list initializer, there's a parameter you can use in the initializer called selection, and you can actually bind this to some kind of, value. So we're just going to bind our selected category to the list. Cool. So now when you tap on this, it'll look like nothing's actually happening, but something is happening. But the reason why you don't get good, you don't get any user feedback is because we don't actually use a navigation link within our list. Now, in my opinion, if you don't do this, this is poor UX because someone's not aware of what the selected category is. So we want to give them some kind of feedback in terms of which one is highlighted when you tap on it. So let's go into our list and we'll use a navigation link. And we'll use the option with the value label. So for the value, this is just going to be category. And for the label, it's going to be this label here. So now, if we just cut this into here, and you'll see now instantly that we're able to see which one is selected and it's highlighted for us. So this is way better UX. Cool. Now, this is all tied to this sidebar view at the moment. There's no way for our menu view to know which one has been selected. So we actually want to create a property in our navigation manager class to handle the selected category in there, and then pass that down into any child view so they can observe it. So this here should actually be a binding. But before we do that, let's just create a publish property in our navigation manager. So if you go to a file called navigation router, you'll see this is where we manage all of our navigation, and we just want to add a publish property in here. So I just added a publish property for the selected category, and it's optional because by default you might not have selected a category at all, so it could be nil. Now back in our sidebar view, we want to turn this from a state into a binding, and then we don't want it to be private, so it should be var, and then we're going to make this an optional menu category to match what's in our navigation router. So we should get a whole bunch of errors here, which is fine. And we'll just fix that for now by just passing in a constant value of food. And just copy this for this as well here. Cool. And also, I'm just going to add in a navigation title, so it just looks more like what we're working with. Okay, sweet. And if we run this in a preview, we should now see, if we run this in a preview, it still won't work because now the problem is that in our menu view, it's expecting a selected category. So what we want to pass in here is the publish property that we have created in our router manager. So we'll say router manager dot selected category, like so. Cool. So when this loads in our preview, let's just test this out. And now when we select on one of these, you'll now see that we're able to track which ones have been selected. So now we're tracking in our navigation what category someone has picked. Something as well is that right now we just have it where it just says detail goes here. So we're not actually showing it any like real information. But what I want to do is on an iPad, I want to show the menu card view, which is the new view that we have, and in a grid, so you can see it in a grid. But on an iPhone, I don't want to show that grid. I actually just want to show a list of the items. Now, if we go into our iPad view, you'll now see that by default, the sidebar that we added now becomes the root view within our not navigation stack, but the stack within our navigation. So I could click on this and it will take me to the detail view. Now on this detail view here, I want to create a list with all of the items like we had in our previous video. So let's create a new view inside of our menu folder called MenuListView. So we just go here and in views, we'll create a new SwiftUI view called MenuListView. So inside of here, let's create a property called items, and it's just going to accept an array of any menu item. Now, by default, just so we can just see this working, I'm just going to assign it the foods array, which is just some dummy data that we have in the project. And another thing that we want is we want to have the ability to set a title depending on what category was selected. So above items, we'll create a new constant as well called title. And then this will be string as well. And we'll just assign that a static string for now of food. Now, because I only want to work with this list view in iPhone, my previews here, I'm going to say I want to preview this for iPhone. I don't really want to see this in an iPad view. So iPhone, like so. So we should get an iPhone view here like this, which is what we want. Cool. So this is just a component that is only going to accept data. I actually don't really need this to have any access to any of the environment objects. So we need to reuse some of the code that we had before in our menu view in here, but we actually want to use a list this time, because if you go into your menu view, you'll see that we actually have a list and a for each, but we're going to reuse our menu item view in here. So let's go into our list view. And inside of here, we're just going to type the following. So we just got a list where we have the items and we use the ID as the unique identifier. And we need to specify this because we're working with a protocol. So we need to say what, property we want to use as the identifier. We get each item and just reuse our menu item view with that. So, help speed up our lives a bit more. Now I want to set a navigation title as well. So we're going to say dot navigation title, and this is going to accept the title that you pass into this view as well. So before in our previous videos, you could actually tap on one of these items and it will push to a screen for you automatically. Now, if you just go into our menu view, you'll see that we had code here where we actually figured out the route and use that with a navigation link to choose where to push to. So we actually want to use this code here, but this time in our menu list view. And that code exists here. Now, in my opinion, I don't think that we should exclusively just have this in a view. I feel like we should move this to a, the router file. So that router file tells us the route for an item. So let's just cut this and we'll remove this extension. And if we go into our navigation router, underneath our replace, we'll add this function. Cool. So now our code for telling us the route for an item is within our navigation class, which makes more sense to me. And we're now able to easily reuse this within our menu list view. So back in our menu list view, what we need to do is get access to that navigating router within here. So let's create an environment object at the top here. And then in our preview, we'll inject the navigation router. And now what we want to do is we want to actually figure out in our list what the route is for that item. So inside of here, we're going to say let route is equal to router manager dot get route for the item, like so. And then we need to use this route by wrapping our menu item view in a navigation link. So we're going to say navigation link. And we want to use the value label. So for the value, this will be the route that we've got from our function. And then the label will just be our menu item view, like so. Cool. And now you'll see that we have it where, we have the carrots, and it's disabled for now because it's not in a navigation stack or a navigation split view. But now we have this set up like what we want. So something else that we also had as well is that when you're working with a navigation link, you also need to register a navigation destination. So when it gets that data, it knows where to push to. So in our menu view, we did that here where we have our navigation destination. And if it matches this type, we would use the view configuration in this enum to say what screen we should push to. So we just want to copy this and essentially paste this underneath our navigation title. Cool. So now most of the work here is done for our menu list view. Now the only problem is I want to be able to actually test this in my previews. Right now there's no way for me to nicely test this within my previews. Now something that I've come up with and I like to do more recently in my SwiftUI projects is create container views, so I can basically almost get like a quick preview within here to build what I want, because essentially a preview is a way for you to validate your views, data and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to do a bit of typing and then we'll just break this down. So what I've got here is a menu list view container, and this container essentially just acts as the view in terms of what it is that actually implement in, the actual menu view. So in here, we just got our state object, a split view with our sidebar bound to our category, as well as our detail now with a navigation stack inside of here that's bound to the routes that our list view has registered for. And we inject the environment object in here. So what I can then do is I can just use this menu list view container within my previews and just preview it for iPhone, iPad, whatever it may be. So I'm able to just quickly prototype in here before I actually commit to using this code. So it's just something that I like to do. So let's just see how this works on an iPhone. So if I actually tap on food now, it takes me to the food. If I tap on burrito, it takes me into that details and so on and so forth. So this is all working because our menu list view in here is now wrapped around a navigation stack. Now, one thing I have realized is that when you go into a detail view, because we define these as sections in previous videos, you actually get this styling where you can like have collapsible sections, which is something I don't want. So to fix this, So to fix this, we actually need to change the inset, the list style on our detail views. So let's just first of all do this on our food detail view. And then on our list at the end, we want to specify that we want the list style to be inset grouped like so. And then we want to copy this and then also put it on our other detail view. So our drink detail view, put that in there, and then do the same on our dessert detail view. Cool. So let's go back into our menu list view and just test this out. And if we go to food, burrito, you'll now see that we don't have the collapsible sections because on the list within the detail views, we're just specifying we want to be an inset groups and that's it. So now we have our menu list view sorted for our iPhone, which we'll get to using in our menu view. The next thing I want to build is our menu grid view for iPad. So let's go into our folder here. And on the views, we're going to create a new view called MenuGridView. Now this is going to accept the same thing that our list did. So let's go into here and we're going to copy our title and our items like so and put that at the top here. And this time we're not going to use a list. Instead here, we're going to use a lazy V grid. So if you want to learn more about that, then check that out on my channel. But when you're working with lazy V grids, you need to specify the grid configuration. So in this, I want an adaptive grid that just basically just shows views based on their width. So I'm going to have an adaptive grid here of 200. So I'm going to type it out and then we'll break this down. So I'm going to have a single column here where it tries to lay out each grid item adaptively with a minimum width of 200, and it will add spacing of 32 between each item. So in here, we want to define a lazy V grid now. So what we have in here is we have a scroll view, because with the lazy V grid, you need to embed it in a scroll view so you can get the scrolling functionality. And then we just pass in our columns and define a spacing of 32, which is the same as the spacing for the items in between. And then we're just going to loop through each one of those items using the ID and then use our menu card view that I've already built. Now I add a seam padding onto the lazy V grid, and what this allows us to do is make sure that the items align with a navigation title. So it's all like aligned in the container, as well as setting a navigation title on the actual scroll view as well. So when we preview this, we should see it within the title within the actual, view, the detail view. So similar to our list view, we also need that access to the router so we can decide where we need to push to. So we're going to copy the exact same code, but this time we're going to wrap our card view in a navigation link. So let's go into our menu list view and just copy our environment object and then paste at the top here. And then we want to copy our code for our getting our route into our grid view. And then we want to, use this navigation link in here. So the reason why this keeps crashing is because I've not injected the environment objects yet. But once I do that, it will resolve the crash. So we want to put our navigation link in here and then replace menu item view with menu card view like so. Cool. So like we did with our list view, I now want to create a container so I can just test this out within this preview. So let's type that out. So now you can see that we basically copy what we did with our list view, where we just have our state object for the route manager. We define our split view and just set it up like we normally would to get our, object sidebar, detail with a navigation stack. And then we just say we want to preview this for iPad. So this is pretty much the same, except the only difference is that we're using a different type of view, and rather than a list, we're using a V grid. So now let's just see what happens. So if you tap on this, you'll realize that nothing's actually working. And the reason why it's not working is because we've not added in the navigation destination 4, even though we added in our navigation link. So again, in our menu list view, let's just copy our navigation destination 4 and put that after our navigation title. And now when you test this out, you'll see that you're able to push to these screens within your iPad. So let's just make this a bit bigger. And you can see now that we're able to push between these screens. So it's super important that whenever you're using a navigation stack, you always include the navigation destination for, which is why I forgot that on purpose. I'm only joking. I 100% forgot to put that in. But something else that I've also forgot is that this here is actually highlighted in blue, and the reason why is because by default the navigation link is actually a button. So to resolve this, we need to set the style on this to be plain so it doesn't get that tint. So this here we say button style and then plain. So this will remove that blue tint, which is essentially the accent color that you define within your project. So now it just looks like the normal text and it looks all good, which is what we want. So right now, our navigation split view just has like a hard coded like grid view, because inside the grid view and the list view, we're assigning it the data within these constants here. So we're not actually passing it the data that it should show, because what should happen if you tap on food, drinks or desserts, the items in those categories is what you should see on the screen, not this hard coded data. Now in our fetcher, we don't actually have code to get items based on their category. So we need to create that now. So let's go into our fetcher and I'm just going to create a function here now and then we'll break it down. So what we have here is a function called get items in category, and it accepts the menu category and returns an array of menu items. And we're just checking to see here is when we call this function, is the action finished? Because we only want to return items when the state is finished within our fetcher. And we unwrap our category as well to make sure that the category is not nil. Now, depending on the type of category, we're just going to get all the items that are either food and then return that, or all the items that are drinks and all the items that are dessert. So we're just using some high order functions here to help us achieve that. What we're actually able to do now is in our menu view, we can actually use this function to get items that will then pass into our grid or our list view. So let's go into our menu view. And if we just scroll up, the first thing we want to do is in our detail, we want to check to see if someone has selected a category, because we don't want to, display items if someone hasn't selected a category. So rather than having this text here, we're just going to say if let selected category is equal to router manager dot selected category. And in the else block here, we're just going to return some text if the selected category is nil, telling someone to choose a category. So now within here, if someone has selected a category, we can now use our function from before. But I said before that I want to change the layout depending on what device someone is using. So if it's an iPhone, I want to show a list. And if it's an iPad or like a Mac, we want to show the grid. So inside of here, we're now going to write some code to switch between those two views. And we can do that by checking the device by using the UI device API. So to do that, we're just going to say switch UI device dot current user interface idiom. And inside of the switch statement, all we're going to say is that if it's a phone, so we're going to say case dot phone, then we're going to use our menu list view. Now, right now, it doesn't accept any data, but we'll get onto that in a second. And by default, we'll just say any other device, we want to use our menu grid view like so. Cool. So now we're able to switch between the layouts depending on what device you're using. In our menu list view and our grid view, we now need to accept, change it so it can accept the title and the item. So let's go into our list view and tackle this first. And right now we've got all this hard coded. So we don't want this to have default values. So we're going to remove this and remove this, and we should get a bunch of build errors, which is cool. Now, what we do want to do is inside of here with our container, we're now able to write a code to basically test out what it is we want to do, in our actual menu view here. So I need reference to that fetcher because that's where that function lives. So we're going to create a state object here. And then within our detail view here, what we're now going to do is we're going to copy the code we had before where we check to see if someone has selected a category. And if they haven't, then show the text, or else in this case, we'll get our products and pass it into here. Is equal to router manager dot selected category like so. And then in the else block, we'll just say the text to choose a category. So let's just copy our code in here. Well, cut, I should say, into our if let. And in here now, we can now say let items is equal to fetcher dot get items in and use our selected category. So because this returns an optional, we can now do this and say if it's nil, just have an empty array. And now in our menu list view, if we choose fix, so for the title here, we want to use selected category dot title. And then for items, we just want to pass in this constant here for items like so. Cool. So we've done this for our list. So now let's actually just copy this for our grid. So we're going to copy this state object into our container view like so. And then in our menu list view, we're just going to copy all the code in our detail into our grid like so, except this time, rather than this being menu list view, we're going to change this to be menu grid view. Cool. So in our menu grid view now, if we scroll up, we still have it where it's assigned a default value. So we're going to remove that and also remove this where we assign the items. And now if we build it, we'll still get some build errors because we need to fix it in our menu view, but we shouldn't have any errors in this file anymore. And now we just need to migrate this code here into our menu view because this is what we want. So to do that, we're just going to go into our menu view. And then here, we're going to say let items is equal to fetcher dot get items in selected category. Assign it an empty array if it's nil. And then in here, we're going to say title. And for the title, again, we'll just use selected category dot title. And then the items here will be items like so. And then menu grid view for title, it will be again selected category dot title. And then items will also be items as well. And if we build this, and it's not building because I've missed a parentheses on the end there. Cool. So now we fixed these parentheses. So the final thing that we need to do now is right now we have it in our list view and our grid view with a navigation destination and a navigation link. But in this context, we don't have a navigation stack like we do in our container view here. So what we want to do is use this navigation stack within our menu views detail. So we go to our menu view detail. So this code here needs to be wrapped around a navigation stack. Cool. So now any nested navigation destinations and navigation links will be handled within our detail view. So now let's test this out. So if we just go into our iPad and just preview this. So now what will happen is when you tap on a selected category, it will actually redraw the view and it will choose the correct items that you need. And then depending on what device, the correct view you want, and we can then navigate down. So let's see. So you tap on food, it shows you all the food, drinks and dessert. Sweet. So now if I tap on one of these drinks, I can now push to a screen to view information about that by reusing the code that we have. Cool. We go to food. You can now see I can reuse that. And even these screens here, like ingredients, I can keep on going down and handle it because this view is wrapped in a navigation stack. Cool. So now if we look at iPhone, you can now see that we have all our categories. And if I tap on one of them, we can go into it and see the items and we can now navigate through. So it's exactly what we want. So now we have our 2-column layout pretty much sorted for iPhone and iPad with minimal effort and just reusing a lot of our existing code. So in our previous app that we had before, we actually had on iPhone a item here where you could actually view your cart, because right now I can't see what I have in my basket. Now, when looking at the UI and UX best practices, from Apple, they seem to put toolbar items in the sidebar, which is what we're going to do as well. So on our sidebar view, we're actually going to add a toolbar onto it. On our group, we're going to use the toolbar modifier. And then within here, we're going to say toolbar item and hit option enter. And the placement for this is going to be primary action, because I want this to be the main action. And then within this closure here, so in our menu view, if we just scroll down, we should see our cart button, and we just want to copy this code here like so. Cool. So let's copy this. Let's paste it in here. We'll uncomment this out. Okay, sweet. And we're just going to remove this temporarily for now. So if we look at this now on our preview, you should now see that we have our cart button on iPhone there, and on our iPad in the sidebar, we have our cart button as well there. I'll just zoom in a bit more. We have our cart button there. So on our iPhone previously, what we had before was when you tapped on this cart button, it actually pushed to a screen. But on here, I'm actually going to change the UX a little bit. So instead of us pushing to a screen, I'm actually just going to present it from the bottom using the presentation detents. And we're going to do the same on iPad, where it just presents the basket from the bottom in the middle of the screen. So in order to do that, we're going to need to create a state variable to tell us whether to show the cart or not. So this is just a Boolean state to tell us whether we should show our cart or not. And inside of our cart button, we now want to toggle this to either be true or false. And we can then listen to this to dictate whether we show a sheet or not from the bottom. So we're going to say show cart dot toggle like so. So now if we just scroll down above our task here, I'm just going to use the sheet modifier, which uses the is presented. And then we're going to bind this to show cart. And in our content, I always hate when it does it like this. Let's just take this out. I prefer when it looks like this. Okay, cool. So in here, we're now going to show our cart view. Now our cart view has a navigation title. So what I'm going to need to do is wrap this in a navigation stack like so, and then say cart. Cool. So now what we want is if we just tap on this, you'll see that it's still presenting it like a sheet, and I don't want that on iPhone. I want it to use the presentation detents where it shows the cart like halfway up the screen. So on our navigation stack, we'll say presentation detents, and we can actually pass in here the options that we want. Now the option I want is medium. You can specify your own, but I'm going to use medium. So now when we tap on it, you'll see that we just get like a nice card that presents from the bottom with our basket, which looks way nicer. And if we actually test this out on iPad, so if I select a category, and now when I tap on here, you'll now see that we get our cart showing from the bottom in the middle, which is what we want. So this is looking good, so we can see our basket. But one thing I want to show you UX wise on our iPhone is that this does work well on this screen here. But when I actually tap into a category, our basket now disappears. So it's not actually there anymore. And that isn't good UX in my opinion. So what we want to do instead is we actually want to also add a toolbar onto our menu list. So the code that we have for our toolbar here, we also want to copy this onto our menu list view here as well. So this menu list view always has a cart button as well. So let's go here. And then now when you click through, you should now see that we actually have a cart button. And if we tap on this, we're actually able to present this from the bottom like we do on our home screen. So this is all good. So if we just go to our iPad again and just go back to it now just to look at this, you can see that, this looks pretty decent. And if I wanted to, I could select an item and add to cart. Our cart shows our item. That's all good. But one thing here on our card is that we actually have a button here to actually add an item into the basket without having to even click into an item at all. But right now, this isn't doing anything. So what we need to do is we need to create a closure for our menu card view to tell our menu grid to add an item into the cart. Now, if you want to learn more about communicating between views with closures, I do have a video on my channel that you can check out. So now let's go into our menu card view. Menu card view. And inside of here, we want to basically add in code for when you tap on the button within the card, we're going to return the item via a closure. So in here, underneath this item, we're going to say let did tap add. And then this is going to pass through the menu item that we set in this view. So any menu item, and then it's going to return void. Cool. So if you just scroll down, we have our button here where we can actually add an item. So in here, we want to call our closure did tap add. And then this is going to accept our item like so. Cool. Now we're going to get some build errors because now our menu card view is it's expecting us to use a closure. So to fix this, we'll just put in some curly braces, underscore, and in like so. Cool. And then if we go into our menu grid view, we now need to also use a closure here. And this time we'll just say item in like so. So in our menu card view here within the grid view, we still need to add some code to actually add it into our cart. So right now we have access to our router manager, but we also want access to our cart manager as well. So let's add that in. And now what we want to do is in here, we now want to call our cart manager dot add to, add it in. So we're going to say cart manager dot add item. And because we've now added a new environment object into this menu grid view, if you scroll down, we actually want to create an instance of our cart manager here and inject it using the environment object. So let's do that. And then below here, we're going to say environment object and then just pass in the cart manager like so. So let's go into our menu view. And now let's just test this out on iPad. So we'll choose a food item, we'll tap on add, and you'll now see that it updates our cart. So we're able to actually add items in. So this is looking pretty good. And now you can see all the items in here. Now, one thing that we've been doing so far is actually testing our app within our SwiftUI previews. But if you actually just run the app on the iPad simulator, or if you just go to it, you'll see that we actually have these, tab bars at the bottom. And I don't want to have these tab bars here. Instead, I want to have it where you can access like settings as another toolbar option. So on iPad, we actually want to hide this tab bar. So how can we do that? Well, if we just go back into our code, so back in our main app entry point here, where we define what views we should display in our tab view, we actually want to wrap this in a group and essentially tell it that if you're on an iPhone, show the tab bar, or else just hide it completely. So let's do that together now. So in our tab view, we'll create a group, and then we'll just first of all copy this code within the group like so. So now our settings and menu will have whatever modifiers we apply onto the group. So in here, we'll use the toolbar modifier. So we're going to say here that if the UI device.current.user idiom interface is phone, we're going to show our tab bar, or else hide it by using the ternary operator. So for tab bar. So now this will ensure that if you're using a phone, it will be visible, but if you're using an iPad, you won't see the tab bar. So let's just rerun this again on our iPad, and you'll now see that our tab bar has now gone. But if I run this on an iPhone, you'll now see that on the iPhone, we still have our tab bars at the bottom, which is what we want. So this is all good. Now, because we removed the tab bar on an iPhone, I actually want to add this back into the toolbar, and we'll look into doing that. But one thing I just want to show you is that if you go into your settings view, that we actually have the option here to choose between two different layouts. So I can choose either a 2-column or a 3-column. Now, right now, the view that we've been building in our menu view is for a 2-column because you can only select the sidebar to hide and dismiss it, and you've got your main detail view. We'll get onto this 3-column when we sort out the adaptivity of our settings. So we need to add in the code on iPad to allow us to change and access this screen. So let's go back into our menu view. And what we're going to do is on our sidebar in our toolbar, we're going to check to see that if you're on a device that isn't an iPhone, we're going to add in a toolbar item to access the settings screen. So let's create a new state property called show settings, so we can present the settings from the bottom like a sheet. And then in our toolbar here, we're going to say if the UI device .current .user interface idiom is not equal to phone, then we can add in our toolbar item for our settings. So I'm gonna type this out and then we'll break it down. So we're just going to say here that if it's not equal to the phone, we're going to have a toolbar item, which is just going to be a button. It's just going to toggle this state, and it's just going to use an image of a gear from the SF symbols. Now we need to use our sheet modifier to actually show this on an iPad. So if we just scroll down below our sheet for our cart view, we're going to create another sheet. And it's going to bind to our show settings. And I'm just going to remove this as usual. And then here, we're going to say navigation stack, because it also has a title, the settings. So we need to wrap it in a navigation stack. And we're just going to say here, settings view, like so. Cool. So on iPad now, if we go into our preview, you'll see that we now have the gear icon. And if we now tap on this, you can now see the view to set your layout configuration, which is what we'll go work with next. So I mentioned before that we got a 2-column and a 3-column layout. So what we want to do is, depending on what option someone has selected in the settings, we basically want to adapt our UI to use either a navigation split view with the sidebar detail, or a navigation split view with the sidebar content and detail as well. Now what we should do is the code that we have in here for our 2-column layout, we actually should extract this out into its own view so we can easily switch between the two. But before we do that, all this code that we have here commented, we're actually going to delete all of this code now because we don't need it. And what I am going to do, create a new view in our menu folder called 2-column menu view. So the whole point of this view is to literally just contain all the code that we've, well, not all of it, but most of the code that we wrote for our 2-column layout. So what we want to copy into this file is all of our navigation split view, except from the sheet and the task modifier. We just want the navigation split view. That's it. So we're going to just copy this and then paste this into our 2-column menu view like so. Cool. Now I fully expect to get a whole bunch of errors because we're missing a whole bunch of stuff. But what we're going to do now is actually add in those things. So we're going to need our environment objects and our show cart and show settings as bindings. So let's just add this in and break it down. So now we have our environment objects for our cart, router, and fetcher, so we can access it within this view. And we have a binding for our show cart and show settings because we don't read from this, but within this view, we do manipulate the values so you can choose whether it's going to be presented because the toolbars live in this view. So I'm going to create a container view for this 2-column menu view now, so we can actually just test it out and preview it before we add in the code in our actual menu view. So if we just scroll down here, I'm going to type out some code and we'll break it down. So in here, in our container view, we just created some state properties for the show cart and settings, and we created instances of our managers that we have, and we simply just basically pass them all into the 2-column view so it can do what it needs to do, as well as using the task modifier to help us fetch the products. So now if we were to preview this, so if I just open this up and then refresh our SwiftUI preview, you should see now that in terms of the navigation for the navigation link and stuff, it now works like it should. Now, the only thing that won't work is the toolbar buttons, because I've not added in the code for the sheet modifiers, but that's not the end of the world. So in our iPad, we can now, do the same thing. Cool. So if I just go into our settings view, if you scroll up, we actually have this property here called app storage. And the whole point of this property is to help us choose what layout experience we want to, have, and store that as a setting between app launches. So we need to use this within our menu view to choose whether we want to use our 2-column menu view or our 3-column menu view that we're going to create after this. Now, right now, this is actually bound specifically to this view. So we need to actually essentially move this out higher up the chain. So we want this to be at the root of our application. So let's just copy this. And we'll put this in our app here. And we'll just put it here below our UI application delegate adapter, like so. Cool. And then back in our settings view, we actually want to turn this into a binding now. So let's just say app binding. And then it's going to accept an optional value like so. So we should get some errors in here, which is fine. So just for this one, I'm going to just pass in a constant value of 3-column, just so we can get it to build. And now what should happen is in our root, we should also get a build error as well, because our settings view is expecting a binding. So if we create an instance of this, in here, we want to pass in our app storage like so. So now we can pass in our layout experience. So now our settings view is bound to the layout experience that's within the root of our application. But just like we have this layout experience in our settings view and it, manipulates it, we actually need access to that, layout experience within our menu view so it can know how to change its layout. So in here, let's also create a binding like we did in our settings view. So we're going to copy this binding and paste it here underneath our state. And again, we should also get some, build errors. So if we go back into here, we want to say in our root that the layout experience should be bound to the layout experience like so. Cool. And then in our menu view within here, we'll also pass it in here. Our binding will go into our layout experience like so in our sheet. And then within here, what we'll do is create a container for our menu view. So let's do that now. Okay, cool. So now we have a container here where it just has an app storage, and we pass that into our menu view, and we just got previews for iPhone and iPad, so we can just see it on different devices. So now we're at the point where we can actually use our layout experience to change what layout you see on the screen. So if you just scroll up, at this moment in time right now, we still have this navigation split view. So we don't actually want this anymore. So I'm just going to delete this and replace it with a group instead. So we're going to say group. And instead, within this group, we want to add a switch statement. So depending on the layout experience, we're going to change what view you see on the screen. So we're going to say switch on layout experience. And then we're going to say case. So if it's a 2-column layout, then we're going to use that view we created called 2-column menu view. And we'll pass in our show cart and our show settings like so. And if it's a 3-column, I'm just going to type out some code. So you can see here, we're now switching between what a user would see. So just before we test this out, you can see here, we're just adding a navigation stack with a text toolbar and a button so you can show the settings screen and change between layouts. So let's go into our preview here and run it. And on the iPad, you'll see that we have our 2 column here, like so. And if I go to 3 columns, you'll see that once we dismiss it, it now changes to this navigation stack. So now we have a layout that adapts depending on the user's settings, which is pretty cool. Now, what we do need to do, because obviously this isn't our 3 column layout, is we do need to use our 3 column view here. So let's look into building that. Now, the nice thing about us having to do this now is that we're basically going to be reusing a lot of the code that we already have. We don't need to do anything too crazy. So all we need to do now is, if we go back to the Apple documentation, you'll see that to create a 3 column, we just need to use this initializer here where it accepts the content and the detail. And for this content, this is where we're going to reuse our menu list view that I was talking about before. So let's go into here and create a new view called 3 column. So within here, I'm just going to create an empty navigation split view, and then we'll start to fill it out as we go along. So we're going to say navigation split view, and then we want the one with the 3 options, and then this is what we want here. Cool. So in here, we're just going to say for now. So now if we look at this on an iPad, if you just open this up, you'll see that you have your content view here, but you can actually tap on this to open up your sidebar as well. So you have 2 extra columns to configure your main detail view here. So what we want to do is put our categories in the sidebar, our items in the content, and then depending on what item, you'll again get more details about that item. So that's the UX that we want to be following. And if we was to switch this to an iPhone, you'll see that it just looks like a navigation stack. So it just acts like the other, 2 column layout. But let's work with our iPad now. And we're just going to copy most of the code that we had in our 2 column layout. So this is going to need pretty much everything that our 2 column layout needs in terms of environment objects and bindings. So let's just go to the top here and we'll just copy all of this. Just scroll to the top and we'll copy our bindings and environment objects like so into our 3 column. And then we'll also create a container like we did for our 2 column. So let's do that now. So it's nothing too different. The only thing that's different here is that it's, rather than it being 2, it's a 3 column. So now we have pretty much everything we need to just get cracking on and reusing most of the views that we're working with before. Now for our sidebar here, we want to copy some of the code that we have in our 2 column menu view. So when you're working with 3 columns, the UX that I've saw is that a lot of the toolbar items are actually on the content and not the sidebar, because the sidebar on an iPad is kind of buried and you don't really see it. You kind of by default have your content and your detail available to you. So we just want to copy our fetch code in here for fetching the content and showing a progress view or the sidebar. So let's go into our 2 column menu view and we're going to copy all of this code here like so. So we don't want our toolbar logic at all. So we go into here and we'll just paste that here now like so. Cool. And now you can see that we have our sidebar with our progress and our title. So that's all good. Now in our content, we do want to copy what we did before in our 2 column, except this time we're going to be showing our menu list view instead of the menu list view and a navigation stack. So we don't actually want a grid in here at all. We only just want to show a list of the items that someone can tap on to then view more details about them. Now, when you're working with a content, you actually do want to give your list a item to essentially bind to, so you know the user can get feedback that they've selected this item. Now, right now, we don't have that, but what we will do is create a published property called selected item ID. So when someone taps on an item in the content block, they'll be able to see what item they're currently, viewing, because it'll be highlighted. So let's first of all, just unwrap our category. And then in our router manager, we need to create a published property where we use the items ID to let the user know that they've selected this item. So let's go into our router manager. And I'm going to create another published property in here called selected item ID, which will be a string. And let's just go back into our menu view. Now I did say here that we're going to use our menu list view, but now that I'm thinking about it, it might be better to just use an actual list and just have a navigation link, because it's just something that's just going to be easier and quicker and cleaner to write. So let's just do that now. Cool. So now let's just break this down. So we're now getting our items for the selected category like we did before. This time though, rather than me using a menu list view, because I didn't want to have to like add in extra initializers and logic for if this was nil, I'm just going to create a list directly within the content. And then within this list, we're going to get the root using our function from before. And then we just use a navigation link where we set the title string and the value will be root. And then we just set the navigation title. So the title for this whole view to basically be the category title. So if we look at what this looks like on an iPhone, if we just tap on this now, you'll see that we now get a list of our items. So it's just a navigation link with the title, and you can see it goes into the detail on iPhone. And if we go onto an iPad, you can see that it's telling us to choose a category once it's finished, and it's showing a progress view for when it's loaded. This is buried, so you can see what I was saying about how we're going to add the toolbar items in here instead. If you choose a category, you can now see your category title and all of your items in that category. And when you tap on it, you get the highlight to show you which one you've selected. So obviously right now, this isn't updating, but we will look at that next. But what I do want to do now is add in the toolbar items that are missing in here for the cart and the settings. So in order to do that, we're first of all going to want to wrap all of this code inside of a group. So let's just create a group. And then all of this code from our if, let, and else, we want to put that inside of the group. So any of the views inside of this group will get these toolbar items. So in our column menu view, we now want to copy this toolbar and apply this onto our group. So let's copy this and put it onto our group. And now in our preview, you should see that even when this is empty and a category isn't selected, and when you do select a category, we have our toolbar items, which is exactly what we want. Cool. So the final thing that we need to look at in here is in our detail view, depending on what item ID has been selected, we now need to basically get the details for the item and display that in our detail view. So I'm going to do a bit of typing and then we'll just break down what's going on. What we're doing here now is we're going to get the selected item ID that our list is binding to. So our list here is binding to in our router manager. So the selected item that you've tapped in the content view. And then once that we can unwrap that, if it's not nil, we're also going to attempt to unwrap the category. Then we're going to get the items in the category and then get the first item that matches the selecting ID that someone has tapped. Now, right now, we're just showing the text, which is just it'll be like an icon of it. Or else, if you've not selected anything, then we will show the text telling you to choose an item. So let's just go into here. And if we now try to choose a category, you'll now see that you can see the emoji on the screen because we're using the item ID that our list is bound to filter out and get that item. And on our iPhone, you'll see that it works the same way. So this is all good. Cool. Now, what we do need to do is instead of us showing some emoji in here, we want to show the correct detail view, whether it's a drink, food, or dessert. So I'm going to create a function to basically figure that out and then break it down. So inside of here now, we have a function called getView, and this accepts any type of menu item. And all it does is to check what type of menu item it is. And depending on that menu item type, if it's a food, drink, or dessert, if it can cast it, it'll return that detail view. Now, if it doesn't meet any of these, it'll just give you an empty view. So now we want to use this getView within our detail view. So rather than this being a text, we actually here want to say getView for item, like so. Cool. So now if we try and test this out, so on an iPad, let's just select one of our categories and then we'll go to burrito. And then in here, you can now see that we got all our details about our burrito in here, which is pretty sweet. Cool. And if we go to our iPhone, you'll see that this works fine too. Now, one thing that isn't working is that if you tap on ingredients and allergies and locations, nothing happens. And the reason why is because our view here isn't wrapped around a navigation stack with the routes that it should be listening for and the destinations that it should be handling. So we need to wrap this get view in a navigation stack and use the destination for to actually handle these deeper, navigation screens. So let's add in a navigation stack. And the path here it's got to bind to is our router manager dot paths routes. And then the route view, we'll copy this in here. And then on this view, we'll say dot navigation destination for route dot self. And then a destination here, we'll just use the $, shorthand, like so. Cool. And now let's just clean all this up. Cool. So now we have it in our detail view where we can handle navigating to screens, further down the navigation stack. So let's just test this out now. And on our iPad, you can now see we can go to ingredients and allergies and whatnot. Well, not iPad, iPhone. And on our iPad, you can now see that we can tap on here, go to a category, tap on here, and then also handle that navigation too as well. So this is looking all good. So what we do need to do though is on our iPhone, I don't know if you clocked a bit of a UX issue, but when you load up the app for the first time, we don't have our toolbar items unless you go into an actual, content view. So we need to add a toolbar item here on iPhone within our sidebar for our 2-column layout. Let's go into our sidebar. And I'm going to type out some code. So now below our navigation title, what we're going to say here is on the toolbar that if you're on a phone, we're going to add the cart button onto the screen. So now on our sidebar view, you can see the cart button. And when you go into an actual content, the cart button is also available as well. So we can always access the cart from the root. And as we start to, go down the screens within our app. So now we have our 3-column menu view sorted. All we need to do is just literally use this view in our menu view in our switch case. So let's go to our menu view. So back in our menu view, what we've said here is that if it's a 2-column, we want to use this 2-column menu. But what I actually want to do is actually tweak this and swap it around. So instead of us having the default be a 3-column layout, I actually want the default to be a 2-column layout. So if you've not selected any layout preferences, or if you've not selected the 3-column option in the settings screen, it will default to the 2-column. And the reason why is because on an iPhone, I want it to just have the category and then the detail, so it simulates like a navigation stack. So we're going to change this to be a 3-column, and then we're going to change this from 2 to 3. And then now in our default, we can copy this and then change this from 3 to 2. Cool. So let's just test this out. So I'm going to run this on an iPhone. And you'll see that when our app launches, it's got the sidebar as the root, which is fine. So these are our categories. If we tap on this category here, it will take us into the food, which is what we want. When you tap on one of the food items, we now view more information about that detail item. So this works good for our food, it works good for our desserts, and it will work good for our drinks. So this is doing everything that we want it to do. Now, if you go to your settings on the iPhone, you'll realize as well that we don't have any kind of like configuration to change the layout on this. And that's because I put code in to do that. And we don't want to allow someone to change the layout on an iPhone either. Now, let's run this on the iPad. And now when we launch this on our iPad, because the last setting that we chose in our layout settings, the last setting that we chose in our layout, it's defaulted to 2 columns. So this is our default now. And we've got our 2-column layout. You can select this and we see our grid with all our items, tap into it, you can just use it as usual. But what I can do now if I wanted to is I can actually switch to a 3-column layout, and you'll see that it updates and uses our 3-column view where we have our content view, which is our list. We have our categories and our sidebar, toolbar items as well. I can select an item and view more information about this. So now this is looking and working all good as how we expect it to. So the nice thing about supporting iPad, like basically implementing this for an iPad, is that if you want to now support the Mac, you kind of get this ported over onto the Mac for you for free. So you don't really need to do anything at all for Mac. It just kind of just uses the iPad styles. So let's go back to our project. And in the options here, we'll now choose My Mac, designed for iPad, and we'll run this. And now you'll see it launch. And when it launches, you'll see it's pretty much the exact same as our iPad. So on our 3-column, you can see here, we've got our, sidebar, content, information. We can now tap on our settings to change the presentation of our view as well. I can go into the information, add things into my cart. It's all looking good. But one thing to keep in mind here is that on the Mac, there's actually an issue. And if you tap on this, you'll get a crash. Boom. So if you look at why it's crashing, it's saying here that we're not injecting our shopping cart manager into the environment. Now, at first this kind of confused me a bit, but it seems that when you're using the sheet modifier in the context of Mac OS, it actually treats this almost like it's a brand new window or scene. So in order to avoid this, because it's not got access to that environment object, we actually need to directly inject it within here. So on this, we're going to say dot environment object, and then we're going to pass in our shopping cart manager instance. So our cart manager, like so. So now if we rerun this, when it launches on our Mac, if I was to add some items into the basket, you'll now see that our cart shows our basket information and it doesn't crash. So now we've got proper Mac OS support with only having to add in 1 line of code. So I feel like that's pretty impressive, pretty big win. So in our previous videos, we actually did have deep linking and we use RocketSim to help us test this out. Now, if you've not watched those videos, they're part of this course where I go over, URLs and push notification deep links. So on our iPhone, what I just want to do now is simulate and see if they still work. Now, the answer is, to give you a little heads up, I don't think it's going to work. So if I send a push notification, and if I tap on this push notification now, you'll see that it opens up our app, but it doesn't actually take us into the item. Now, what's going on? Well, before we actually had a navigation stack at the root, and that was listening to the paths in our route manager. So if we just go into our route manager, it was listening to this property here. So it knew that whenever we added a route into here, it would just push onto it on the stack. Now, because we're working with a navigation split view, if we just go into one of our column views, so let's just go into our maybe 3-column menu view, we actually don't have anything that this navigation split view is bound to. So it's not actually listening to our router manager. So right now, when we open up our application, it doesn't know where to go. So we have to change the way we handle deep linking a bit. And if you remember, our sidebar has a selected category. Now, in our iPhone context, what we have to do is actually select a category. And then once we're in this context here, you can now see that it automatically pushes to the screen. So our deep links only work if we select a category first and then go onto the screen, which has our navigation stack, which in our case is our detail view in our, split view. So the first change we're going to do is in our handle deep link function, we're actually going to need to actually write some logic to select a category based on the push notification or custom URL deep link. So let's go into our main app entry point. And above here, I'm going to type a bit of code and then I'll break it down. So now what we have here is we're saying that if you have a deep link and we're trying to manage it and it's not anything relating to the menu, if it's the menu item, well, we'll handle this in a second. But anything else by default, we just want to select one category so we can just handle pushing to that screen. So this can just select any category, the first one. But if it's a menu item, we don't just want to automatically choose the first item of a category, because if I want to go to a dessert, the first category might be food and that's not the correct one. So what we need to do here is write some code to actually figure out what the category is for an item, and that doesn't exist. But if we go into our product fetcher, let's add a function in here that allows us to get the category for an item. Now, if you're working with a real API, you might have this where you can, call a service, or you can just do what I'm doing now where you figure it out based off the data. So let's do that. So what we're doing here in this function now is we're essentially going to pass the item into this function, and based on what type it is, we're going to return a category. So if it's food, then we'll return the food, category case. Drinks, we'll return drinks. With dessert, we'll return desserts. If it doesn't match any of these, then we'll just return nil. So back in our main app entry point within our menu item, we're now able to get the category that we're able to get the category for an item. What we can say here is let category is equal to fetcher dot get category for item, like so. Cool. And then we can assign the selected category within our router manager. So let's just run this now on our iPhone. So we'll change this to iPhone and we'll run this. And now if I select this push notification and then we tap on it, you'll see it pushes through to the correct screen. And that's because it selects the category and then it uses the navigation stack within the detail within the split view to navigate to this screen. So let's test this out on an iPad. So we're going to go onto our iPad and then we'll just run that on here. Okay, cool. Now I just want to make sure. Yep, so we requested push notifications. So we're going to test this out specifically in our 2-column layout. So if we just put this onto the home screen and then we will push through this notification for the burrito item, you tap on it. Cool. You can see it selects the item and then it also shows the information about the item from the grid. So this works. Now, if we change this to a 3-column, and if we put this back onto here, if we do a similar thing, but this time test it in the 3-column layout, you'll see that the deep link still isn't working. But if you look at it, you'll see that the category is selected. So what's going on in our 3-column layout? Well, essentially what's happening is that in order for you to choose or see an item here in the detail view, you need to have a item here selected. So we need to write code in here when we've got a push notification for an item to actually select the item so we can view the details within here. So we need to do a bit more work with our handle deep linking. But what about if you're working with a deep link like a promotion, or a discount? They don't have an item to select. So that's a bit tricky. So we've got 2 scenarios here. We've got a scenario where we have a selected item and we have a scenario here where you might just have a promotion. Well, what we're going to do now to tackle this and combat it is actually refactor our 3-column view detail a tiny bit. And what we want to do is actually wrap the detail within a navigation stack so we can still push to an item if it's like a promotion. But if it is a item, like a menu item, we can select it from here and it will show up here. So let's go into our 3-column view. And if you scroll down to the detail, is that back in our handle deep link here, when we choose our selected category, if it's a menu item, we actually want to set the selected item ID based on the item.id. So now our category will be selected and our item will be selected. And what we also want to do in here as well is that if the layout experience is not free column, then we want to call our function to push on the navigation stack like so. Cool. So what this will do is this will ensure that on a free column layout, we don't start pushing on an item. It does basically simulates this where the item is just selected for us. We don't want to be pushing to a item in a free column layout. But if it's anything else like a promotion, it's fine to push on that stack. So we need to copy this code in here. So now let's just test this out in a 2 and a 3 column layout. So if we run this again now, so what we can now do is if we just dismiss this, and if I send myself a push notification for burrito and tap on it, you'll now see that our detail view gets filled with the correct information, and also our item is selected, so we get our information here and our category, which is what we want. Cool. Now I think there's a bit of a bug with SwiftUI because it doesn't update all the time to show the burrito here, so that's just something to be aware of. But it does, the logic is right, it does work. So we put this on the home screen, and if we try and open up a discount promotion, you can now see that we're not replacing the detail view, we're actually just pushing on top of it, which is what we want as well. So I can apply this discount, and you can now see that I can see what's in my basket from the previous code, and we can go back. Cool. So if I choose an item and add it to the cart, you'll see the discount and also the amount. So it's exactly what we want. Cool. So I wanted to show you how you can add a bit more customability to your iPad apps, and what I want to do is to show you how you can listen to keyboard commands. So it's actually possible to get a magic keyboard and have your iPad apps listen to these keyboard inputs. So in order to do that, we're first of all just going to go to our menu view, and what I want to do is I want to basically toggle the visibility of these columns. So if I tap a keyboard command on my keyboard, I want it to either open this up or close it and dismiss it all. So we're going to work on that now. So let's create a new state variable here called show all columns. So by default, this show all columns will be set to true because the columns that we want to see are open by, when you open up the app for the first time. Now, what we need to do is we need to use the keyboard shortcut modifier that's available to us in SwiftUI to listen to keyboard commands. Now, you can attach this to a view that performs an action, such as a button, toggle, switch, all of them. But we're going to do a bit of a trick here where we actually attach a button in the background so we can listen to the events that someone's doing when they're tapping on the keyboard. So there is a method to this madness. So I've just added a background with an empty button, and within this button, it will actually toggle all columns, the value to either true or false. Now, the keyboard shortcut here, what we're saying here is that with the input H and the control key, so control H will toggle the value within this. So what we're going to do now is use the onChange modifier to listen to when the value of this changes. All right, cool. So now let's just run this. And in order to test this out, what you need to do is on your simulator, you want to make sure that on input, the connect hardware keyboard is selected, and also as well, the use keyboard language, same language as macOS. And you want to make sure that on your input, you're saying here to send keyboard input to the device. So when you do that, you should see that this is now listening, and it should say press escape to stop capture. So this is now listening for our keyboard for shortcut commands. So we said here that we want to change this value. So trigger this button on the keyboard shortcut modifier whenever someone hits control H. So if we do this combination, this code in here will fire. So let's say on here on my keyboard, I'm going to do Control and H. And if I go back, you'll see here that it's actually printing out a value. So just so you can see that whilst I have the simulator open, if I just dismiss this, tap on this, if we do Control H, you'll see as I'm doing it, it's changing, which is what we want. Cool. So I'm going to hit escape to stop listening for that. But what we want to do now is actually change our columns visibility. So if we go into the Navigation Split View API documentation again, you'll see that when you scroll down, there's actually an initializer where you can pass in a column visibility. So you can actually say what you want the columns to look like. So if we go to Navigation Split View visibility, you'll see that this object has all these different options here. Now, what we're going to do is work with two of these, and the one we're going to work with is all and detail only. So you can switch to see all the columns or just the detail when you hit Control H. You can play around with this if you want to, but by default, it's using automatic. The first thing we need to do is create a state variable here for listening to what we want the column visibility to be. So let's add that in. And by default, I'm just going to say it should be automatic, which is fine. But if we just scroll down now, what we want to do is in our onChange, based on the new value, so if it's true, we want to set our column visibility to be all. And if it's false, then we just want to show the detail only, because this is for the show all columns. So just to make this a bit clearer, we'll just say should show columns. And then after our print, we'll say column visibility is equal to should show columns. And if it's true, we'll say all, or else detail only, like so. Cool. Now, right now, I'm going to need to update this. All right, cool. So right now, this column visibility state property that we created is not being used for anything at all. So what we're going to need to do is actually add in another property within here to pass through what the column visibility should be for a 3 or 2 column menu view. So let's create a binding. So we're going to go into our 3 column first, and the binding we're going to create is going to be based off this. So I'm just going to copy this and add it below here and change this to binding. And now on our navigation split view, we're able to create an initializer, state column visibility, and then bind it to our column visibility, like so. So this is going to complain in our SwiftUI preview, which is fine. And also this shouldn't be private because we want to expose it. Cool. So this shouldn't be private. We've got our binding here, and this is now going to complain in our previews if we scroll down, and it's fine to just set this to a default of all. Cool. And now this is saying that this should be the last one, and to be honest with you, I don't like this being the last one. So if I just scroll up, I'm actually going to change the order of this and make this the first parameter in our initializer, which is fine. Cool. And now we need to apply the same technique that we have here to our 2 column. So let's go into our 2 column, and then above show cart, we'll paste that in. And then we'll also copy our navigation split view, as well as what we have in our preview, where we just have it set to a default. So I'm just going to copy this. And then in our 2 column, we'll add in our parameter here. Boom, all good, sweet. So this should complain in our menu view, which is expected. So back in our menu view, now we need to pass in our column visibility to both of these. So let's do that now. So hit enter, and then we're just going to bind this to that parameter. So column visibility, and then copy this and then do it the same again. Cool. So let's build this. And this is still complaining. Why? Oh, I spelled it wrong. Well, there goes my spelling. So I spelled this wrong. So it should be column, not column. This is missing the N on the parameter. So let's spell that correctly. So column, put an N on that. And then we'll also go into our to column and also put an N on that. And then replace that here as well. ColumnVisibility. And then also replace that here because we spelled column, not column. Cool. Okay, sweet. So now let's actually just run this on the iPad simulator this time. And by default, you'll see that it's just showing our, content and our detail. But if we just listen to the input where we have this turned on, send keyboard input to device. And now if I hit Control H on my keyboard, you'll now see that because it was set to true, and we set it to false now, it hides everything. And if I hit Control H again, it shows all of our columns. So now we're able to do that. And if I switch to a 2-column layout, you'll see that it shows that, hides it. So we're now able to hide this depending on, some keyboard shortcuts. So this is a nice way of adding shortcuts into your application by simply using, this technique that I have here. Now, some more keyboard well, this is not a keyboard interaction, but this is more a Apple Pencil interaction. So alongside the keyboard, there's also another accessory that you can listen for, which is the Apple Pencil. And on the simulator for iPad, if you select this icon here, it actually enables as if you got like an Apple Pencil. So what we can do is if I select this, you can see I get hover styles on certain items like this. So if I select a category, something that you might not have realized in the app, or actually it's not in the category, sorry. If I select the settings, something you can do is actually see that I've added some coding to handle hover states. So if we go into our settings view and just hit escape off this to get off here. So you have to hit escape to cancel that. If you go into the settings view, within the layout experience views, and then in our selection view here, you'll see that I actually have some code here for onHover, which allows me to listen to when someone is hovering over with an Apple Pencil. So something you can check out, which I think is pretty cool. And it's a little nice to have, add some like interactivity into your applications. And then the final thing I want to show you is how the app reacts when it's in split view and also slide over view. So if I choose these little 3 menu items here, you'll see I get some options to choose either split view or slide over view. So if you choose slide over, you'll see now that we can see a floating window of our application when we open up other apps. So I can be searching here and I now get like a navigation stack of my app. So I can use this like I normally would, which is all good and what I'm expecting, which is sweet. And if I was to now, go onto the 3-column layout, you'll see that when we change the configuration, I now get my 3-column layout configuration as well. Now, if I change this to a split view and say I want to put this on the right-hand side, you'll see that it basically expands, but it's still showing the stack style navigation that you would get with an iPhone on a iPhone. And if I make it smaller, you can see that it shows it. So we can still interact with it like that. If I make it what it was before in terms of size, it's still like a stack view. But something interesting is that if I go all the way up, you'll now see that it turns into a column-based layout because it's got enough space to do that layout. So you can see how Navigation Split View reacts to different sizes and makes sure that you have the right amount and best space to accommodate your iPad apps. Cool. So we learned a lot here and I've gone over too many topics. I'm not even gonna list them out, but there's probably a lot of chapters in this video. And you know, what I just wanted to show you here is how easy it is to add in multi-platform support by just making a few, you know, little tweaks and add in some small changes, but as well reusing your code that you already have from before. You can get some great looking apps like this. So if you enjoy my teaching style, I actually do have some courses you can check out on my website. You can go and see them there. Also, as well, if you want to help me in a monetary way, you can actually leave me a donation. There's a thanks button on YouTube to say thank you to me, or you can do that on Coffee. As well, you can also subscribe to my YouTube membership where you get some cool badges to show that you're one of the ride or dies. Now, if you don't want to, you know, donate with any monetary value, that's completely fine. But what you can do to help support me is simply by liking the video, subscribing, commenting, and also hitting a notification bell to get updates for whenever I release a new video, and sharing it with people, you know, if you found this, you know, useful and you saw some worth in it. Now, I just want to say thank you to all my YouTube members. I really appreciate the support that you give me, and I do see you're out there. But that's everything from me in this video. I'll see you all later. Deuces.